All right. Good morning, everyone. It's just I think it's 8:15 on my watch, so I would like to go ahead and get started to make sure that we have ample time to for these committees to meet virtually. I'd like to welcome everyone this morning. It's lovely to see 64 folks on the call, bright and early, ready to kick off today's events. I'm sure everyone is still invigorated from our keynote yesterday, Dr. Bell, and she'll be closing, doing some more discussion around CRT and equitable outcomes for all students today. I quickly wanted to provide an overview of the schedule. We will move into the committees. Will meet in their virtual rooms. The committees are listed and the regular work will proceed. When we return at 10 o'clock, we'll have committee report outs and Dr. Mark Shields will facilitate that for us. We will, however, I want you to note that we will, however, have the IE committee report out first before the IG community of practice. So we'll add a point there and start with the IG committee for report outs. And they will report out as listed. We have a talk from Dr. Leah, who's going to talk to us about school-based mentors and foster youth, and then we'll move into Dr. Bell's wrap up. I will follow with some closing remarks and then remind the group of next steps, reviewing our schedule and meeting evaluation. So I think at this time, if there are no questions or concerns, maybe I'll ask that folks have questions about how we'll proceed through the day or schedule.
Tichelle, just one thing to bring up real quick.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I forgot to do this yesterday, folks. I'm so sorry. But is there anybody brand new to the Dean's Compact? And if so, we'd sure love to see you wave your hand and welcome you. We always like new members, and sometimes we don't get a chance to do that. So anybody new? Bunch of veterans. That's great.
Hi, I'm Kelly Smith, and I'm from Shawnee State University, and this is my first time on, so it's nice to meet all of you.
Kelly, great to have you.
Thanks for joining us, Kelly.
Thank you.
Are there any questions about today's schedule? Agenda? All right, so everyone has complimented Stanley. Stan the man, I think it's hilarious, but he is about that when it comes to technology, right? So when Stanley gets ready, he can absolutely move us all to our respective groups. And everyone seems to be signing in the chat with their names and emails. So thank you so much for doing that. If you haven't, please do so that we can have an accurate account of attendance. Who's in attendance?
Folks, hopefully you had some really great discussions. I know we always have really good stuff in the dissemination group. We come with some great ideas and things. Again, if you haven't been part, I know Kelly, you're the one who spoke up, who's new to this. Each of these committees have just some great purposes. I'll let them explain what that is just for a second or two and then give a report out. Our first group is going to be the Impact Evaluation Committee. Dr. Barb Hansen, who's the chairperson, is going to do that. Barb, are you about ready?
I am ready. We had the opportunity to meet today with the community of practice, and it was a very, I thought, rewarding time. Our committee of, typically we have 8 or 9 people, and with the community of practice, we were a group of 35, And so a little larger than we typically have, but it was an opportunity to hear a bit of the context, I guess maybe the history of the Impact Evaluation Committee's work over the past few years, and how it has come to the point that we are concentrating on at the moment with the high leverage practices. And Amy Hallie was our presenter and had an amazing PowerPoint as she went back through the different steps of the development of a survey that we've worked with over time, and how that survey and the time that we invested in creating the original survey, how that kind of morphed into the survey that many of you participated in last spring regarding the high leverage practices. It was interesting in that the PowerPoint shared the results of the survey that you all completed. We looked at what were the top 15, if you will, just in terms of the results, the placement that your candidates used as they kind of prioritized the different HLPs that were listed. So we were looking at the 15. We then began to merge the results of that with the work that the community of practice is doing, and looking at how effectively can we, at least initially, work with 44 items. And so the 15 that had been identified, we're going to actually kind of put them into 4 different categories. And Jennifer Otley has done a lot of work helping to conceptualize ways to group that. And I think it's going to be very helpful, because they're going to use the structure or similar structure to what the Ohio SSTs have developed. And I think it's around the planning of instruction, the delivery of instruction, the assessment of instruction, and then finally the putting everything all together. And so we could see of our 15 identified HLPs, it will be, I think, a process that will make a lot of sense for us to do that. So we had the opportunity to talk through that with the community of practice folks. And I think it was just a great presentation. After they left to have their own meeting, then we continued as different IHEs. We talked about our own current challenges with our field experiences and our candidates going out to schools, and the restrictions with COVID, and schools turning to virtual learning, and our candidates were out there for field experience. So we had a lot of variety as we talked about all of that. I think for one, I think our Impact Evaluation Committee too is very excited about the work with these 15 high leverage practices, and where we can go with them, and other research that can be conducted with them. And we know that the community of practice will be heavily involved in future, research with that and work with it. So I think if you're interested, it's not like we wouldn't share the 15, certainly we will, but at our conference in January, there will be a small group presentation about it. And we hope that you'll come and hear that. And in the meantime, we certainly will, be sure that people are aware of what they are. With the final thing I would say is we talked about whether or not, I shouldn't say whether or not, I think we talked about how to sort of combine, maybe package is a better word. How could we take the work that we have done and tell the story of what we did to arrive at where we are, having identified these 15? Maybe that's the genesis of an article, some kind of a reflection that could be shared with people. So, we'll look forward to maybe doing more work with that. But we just had, I thought we had an amazing discussion. And as someone else just said a few minutes ago, we always have great discussion, and you kind of hate for it to end. So if I missed anything really significant, those of you on the committee, would you please unmute and mention it? I don't want to leave out anything.
Just that Amy has done amazing work.
Amy's done amazing work. Yeah, absolutely. We're so glad she's on our committee. Oh. But she loves all the committees, I know, so don't be offended. She's at home with us, so yes, thank you, Amy. Okay, thank you, everybody. That's all I have.
Thank you, Barb, very much, and team, appreciate that. Any questions at all for Barb, real quick, before we move on? Okay, thank you very much. Well, I know that the impact evaluation group and the IG, or the incentive group folks, were working together. So it seems to make sense to have them go next. So I'm wondering if you could do that. Jennifer, are you there? Are you willing to go next?
Absolutely. Thanks. I'm Jennifer Otley. I serve with Michelle Duda and Judith Mansour. We're the three of us co-facilitate the community of practice together. And being joined with the Impact Evaluation Committee this morning was really important so that all of our community of practice members could get a good understanding of the context from which the inclusive instructional high leverage practices were developed, the methods behind the studies that were conducted, and what the findings of those studies were and how that relates to their work as a teacher educator. So being a COP member, in addition to the important role that they have of getting their new inclusive preparation programs approved and through the accreditation process, another important outcome for them is that they develop deep understanding of the inclusive instructional high leverage practices so that they can embed that into their programs. So that was one reason why it was important to have that joint session this morning, so that we were all being able to move the work forward together. Once we separated back from the Impact Evaluation Committee into our smaller group, hold on one second. We spent most of the time separating into our 4 groups of those 4 domains: planning for the instruction, delivering instruction, assessing instruction, and learning together through collaborative systems. And through these conversations, as we were reporting out after we came back together, you could hear how they were all steeped in the importance of relationships and collaboration with one another, particularly how we can collaborate to promote positive outcomes for all learners, and also how this how collaboration really grounds us together in the work of the compact to continue our connection with the broader work of what goes on with the compact, even beyond the work of the COP. Meg and Charles have also volunteered to share out a takeaway from the discussions. So I'm going to mute myself momentarily and give them an opportunity to share.
So I'll go ahead and go next, Charles, if you don't mind, because I have a quiet living room right now. I want to try to get this out before my 4-year-old comes back. So just kind of echoing what we already heard, the work of Amy in particular is we spoke about in our group how important it is to have the hard and fast data to support what we're trying to do in collaborating between general ed and special ed out the high leverage practices. So we're super thankful for the actual artifact that came out of that PowerPoint presentation and the paperwork that we will take back with us. The relationship building came up in our small group as well. And on a personal note, just thinking about the relationships that we're all building through these quarterly meetings, I don't think can be underestimated. And just a real quick personal note, I accidentally got booted out of my earlier meeting, but as a result, I met somebody on here I hadn't seen before, and we had the low incident disability connection in common. So even just like chance occurrences, it's just really beautiful to see. And then just the last quick closing comment, specifically out of the high leverage practice of for instruction, we as a group reminded ourselves of the importance of that explicit, purposeful demonstration and modeling of how to create the thorough lesson plans that will then help to lead to better assessment all around on the part of our pre-service educators, on the part of the children in the schools, and of course our beloved EdTPA assessment. So planning doesn't just happen, it must be purposeful, it must be intentional and explicitly taught, and we have to hold ourselves accountable as well as teacher preparation providers. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity to share.
So the HLP we looked at was assessing instruction, and it has 3 main components: identify my students' academic strengths, use progress monitoring to inform instruction, and use student performance data and other feedback from students to improve my instructional strategies. We talked that assessment is that big area that really seems to trip a lot of our candidates. Whether it's EdTPA data or it's OAE data from their state assessments or whatever the case. And so we feel like this is one of those key areas that we really need to focus on in deeper ways. And particularly around things like formative assessment and using progress monitoring data for their own students in the field and in student teaching to really get an idea of what are my students learning, and then what do I need to change in order to make their learning more meaningful and they more successful academically. So a lot of work to do around this area, particularly, I think, both in our own classrooms at the university and then in our community partner classrooms. So thanks.
Thanks, Meg and Charles. And looking forward into 2021, Judith, Michelle, and I are really looking forward to offering some one-on-one coaching to incentive grantees to help them with problem solving some challenges they may be experiencing in getting their grants rolled out or their programs through the accreditation process, and just giving the support that they need for their projects to be a success. So we love being a part of the compact, and thanks for being able to share out.
Jennifer and team, thanks so much. Charles and Meg, appreciate your input on that for sure. Always good to hear from your group. Our third group is the dissemination group, and we're going to turn it over to our fearless leader, Jim Gay. So Jim, it's all yours.
Okay. Thanks, Mark. Can you hear me? Okay. The committee had a couple of tasks this morning. First of all, they reviewed the schedule for the conference, and the schedule looks great. Thanks for the core group for your job in terms of putting everything together. Really looks good. So we're looking forward to the conference. One of the tasks we had was to identify folks who would introduce our keynotes and our workshop folks. So we've done that. We've identified folks who will introduce those people, and we'll send you a list of who's introducing who for the keynote and the workshop. The other task that we had as a group was to review the concurrent session proposals. We have 18 slots available for concurrent sessions and 23 proposals. And that's a nice problem to have. At least we know we had enough proposals to fill up the slots. But again, we had 5 over in terms of the number of proposals. Interestingly enough, 5 universities had 2 proposals. So what we'd like to do with that is, with those 5 universities, notify them that what we're thinking about is giving each of those proposals from the university that has 2 half the time to present during the same link. So rather than 50 minutes for those 2 from the same university, each would have 25 minutes. There's a couple advantages to doing it that way. One advantage for the participants is they would get to see more presentations. Another advantage for us is if we have someone that drops out at the last minute, we would have automatically, we'd have some folks who are able to fill in. So again, that's our solution to reducing the proposals. With the 5 universities that have 2, can we circle back and say, hey, can you guys split your presentations? And if you don't want to do that, can you select one of the 2 that you would like to go forward? So we'll work with whoever to get that done. I know that Judith, you've been working with the proposals. So if you need more information from us, let us know. We also talked to, pardon me? Yeah.
I just said thank you. Will do.
Okay, be glad to talk to you about it. We also talked about tech related issues. This conference is going to be virtual, and the virtual format, although it's not brand new for us at this time of year, it's really a new format. We're all used to going face to face. And there was a suggestion that practice sessions be offered for the presenters, including the breakout presenters and the moderators. We're going to have moderators for each breakout presentation. Now, that's an invitation. We can't make people go, but if we can work with the folks in the core committee to get a couple practice sessions at least set up and let people know that they're available, we think that would be a prudent thing to do. The dissemination committee is a nose to the grindstone kind of committee, and they're focused on work all the time. And in that vein, they suggested that we have a virtual happy hour at the end of day 2. And by that, we meant, after the day's over on day 2, could we have a link for folks who want to go and just kind of meet and network and have a soft drink or an adult beverage on their own and just kind of talk to one another. So if that's possible and we could schedule a virtual happy hour at the end of day 2, we think that would be well received by the folks who wanted to go. And finally, we had a question that we couldn't answer. We wondered about the presentations and whether they would be recorded. And if they are recorded, will the actual presentations be available on the website? So that is something that, if you could let us know, we were just interested in knowing if we could view the presentations later on. So that's it from the committee. Committee members, is there anything else I've forgotten that you'd like to add? Okay, Mark, back to you.
Jim, thanks, folks. Thanks, team, for doing that. And again, I think, like Jim said, I think the program schedule's coming together really nicely with a lot of great speakers, and The proposals are actually awesome. And to try and say this one isn't going to go, just didn't go well with the committee because they all looked really, really great.
Yeah.
If we could do this, our next one is our low incidence committee. And Sally, would you be willing to go?
Absolutely. I would like to say good morning to everyone. And our committee had a brief agenda, but deep conversation today. That was the most important pieces for us. The first thing we had was our update from the TVI, which is the Teaching of the Visually Impaired and the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Consortium programs. I'd like to report that Rio Grande has joined as a new partner, and in specific, we'll be offering the Orientation and Mobility Assessment course. And then the universities providing courses and representing from the consortium for the spring term is Bowling Green, Shawnee State, the Ohio State, and Rio Grande. So those 4 universities are all teaching components of the program. We continue to have good interest in both programs with the next cohort applying, and we've introduced a new online application. So we're hoping that that's a little more seamless and readily available for the student and for those institutions who are all participating. In specific, Karen gave us a nice little piece of data when she looked at the 56 completers of the TVI program. They are now being representative and being able to provide some services in 29 of Ohio's 88 counties. But when you look and place those additional counties on the map, the greatest need still tends to be in the southeast corner of the state and the far northwest corner. So we're going to do some targeted recruitment, but those of you who have institutions in those areas, if you'd help us get the word out, certainly Karen can provide you with the appropriate materials and advertisements and links to get you there too, so we can have a little better concentrated effort there. Then we went on to discuss the study that's being done from Word Farmers, and Craig Howley reported out to us about the supply and demand when it comes to teachers of the hearing impaired and teachers of the visually impaired. We also looked at O&M and interveners, since those are the programs that we have running out of the consortium. And the biggest takeaway is the demand is much greater than the supply that we have. Everyone though on the committee, and those of us who have been on this committee for several years, applauded the updated data and very much feel that Craig and his team at Word Farmers has really unearthed some really steady data that we can believe the numbers. It's not easy data to get. We know that even though a student may have a visual impairment or a hearing impairment, they're often being served under a different label when we look at those classification systems. So if I just want to share out 2 big numbers, in order to meet the needs and the predicted needs of the students who are of hard of hearing, we would need a 48% increase in our teacher licensure areas. And for those who have needs in the visual impairments, we would need 116% increase in our current teacher licensure. So it still speaks to the need for these programs. And we're so pleased that we have state support for the collaborative efforts that the universities are doing and trying to get these licensure areas done. Again, they're looking at trend data and looking at what's happening in the rural areas, as well as our more metropolitan centric areas and the access to services. The other piece there is this data will be up on the Ohio Dean's Compact. So I'm sure Deb will send an announcement out to everybody once that data has been in its scrubbed form, ready to go up for everybody. The 4th piece on our agenda, we went back because we've got the 2 consortia up and running and the extra programs. We started looking at a question that was raised when we looked at some licensure bands and meeting the needs of students who have severe and multiple disabilities. So we went back to a brief that was done from the compact in 2016. We looked at our language. We talked about the services for these students. We've also started to talk about what is our next steps for our committee. So we identified some data needs, some pieces that we need there, working from that. And we were also going to be using the Cedars Center's innovation configurations. That everyone on the committee has the document currently, and we're going to look down through those and see what kinds of questions. We're also going to look, there are currently 17 institutions in the state who are providing licensure for moderate intensive. So we're going to be asking those folks for a little bit of sharing of what's being covered in their programs, but we're just starting there. So there's nothing really to report out, but just know that that's where our work is going to go here for these spring months. And did I leave anything out, folks on the committee? If so, please unmute and update the group. Great, thanks.
Sally and team, thanks so much. Really appreciate your efforts and time on this one. And our last group, our policy committee. Deb, would you be ready to go?
Sure. One of the things that we had about 4 different items on our agenda, and I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get my notes up here. Sorry. We had about 4 different items on our agenda, and one of the things that we initially talked about in more of an exploratory way to kind of get the conversation going for the future was the gaps in licensure credentialing in early childhood, specifically birth to 2 and 3 to 5. So we talked extensively about the different barriers and concerns around assuring that there is proper training, credentialing, but essentially what our recommendation is that we pursue the idea of combining the initiatives that were coming from the governor's office because of his real interest in early childhood. These unfortunately have been sidelined by the pandemic at this point, but we wanted to look at those initiatives along with the current early childhood piece that we have. And to do that, we are recommending that we collect and review data around this issue to be sure that any further action that we would recommend is grounded in the actual needs of the early childhood system. Mary Murray will be working with Jennifer Otley to convey our conversation to her committee so that we can work together on combining the governor's initiative with the work of her committee. So that was the first thing that we discussed. Then we were talking about the newly formed Dean's Compact, diversifying the workforce ad hoc committee that has been formed in conjunction with CEDAR. The goal of this committee is to fulfill the commitment we have to educational equity, social justice, and inclusivity. And to do that, we really need to expand the inclusive educator preparation programs in Ohio and increase our efforts to diversify the workforce of both teachers and school administrators in our state. The first meeting of the committee will be Tuesday, December 8th. And our policy committee had a discussion about the current state of attempts to diversify the workforce. This is something that's been going on for a long time, and we are not necessarily seeing results. So we're hoping that we will be able to get some results as we continue to discuss this, because it should be noted that our committee is activated at the same time that an ODHE committee is being activated on diversifying the workforce. And in fact, the first meeting of that committee is today at 3 o'clock. So the ODHE committee is continuing the work of a task force that made recommendations in 2018. There are overlapping members of these two committees, the Dean's Compact and the ODHE committee, and we're going to push to make sure that these committees work in tandem so as not to duplicate efforts, but to support each other and complement the work that we do. The third thing that we did, we had a brief discussion of the role of remote learning in Ohio that is likely to continue past. Sorry about that, you guys. I still have a landline and I can't get to it to stop it. This remote learning in Ohio is really likely to continue past COVID. And there, in fact, is a state level committee that I serve on that is looking at how to do that effectively and what considerations need to be made if we are going to continue remote learning. So we did acknowledge in our discussion that higher ed is going to need to be part of determining how this can be done, and look at the role of pre-service programs in incorporating remote learning strategies into their curriculums. We would like to see something be complementary to face-to-face as opposed to taking it over. We're very concerned about students' social emotional learning needs as well as their academic needs, and how do we make sure that in increasing our use of remote learning, we are not slighting those social emotional and mental health type needs that we know our students and their families really have. Excuse me. And the last thing we did was we reviewed feedback from the larger body, the whole Dean's Compact, on the potential of making changes to our fully licensed teacher policy statement that we distributed to everybody at the last meeting. And we did solicit feedback from people. We got a few comments and we discussed the things that were recommended to us. And after a pretty lengthy discussion and review of the recommendations, it was really determined that we would leave the policy statement intact with some additional information. We needed to go back to one of our main purposes in creating that document, and it was to communicate to legislators that seem to be introducing legislation that we kind of call the anybody can teach legislation, that they introduced with the intent of giving local districts more flexibility in hiring. We are concerned that if you're going to have that flexibility in hiring, you are going to water down the strengths of and skill set of teachers, and we don't want to do that. So it was important to keep the paper very concise since it's aimed at legislators, and it needs to be it needed to be an effective communication vehicle for them that they would in fact read, and it needed to be as concise as possible to make sure they could get the points clearly. So we, in the paper, we're obviously going to hold firm to our stance that there should be no watering down of licensure requirements. What we are planning to do to enhance the paper is to add references in the form of footnotes or an appendix that lists research that backs our position, so that legislators will understand there is research-based, there is research that bases that our position is based on. I'm sorry, you guys. So at any rate, that was the sum of our meeting, and I want to really thank all our committee members because they're really great, and they really have so many good insights into things. And do any of you have anything that you would like to add to this? Doesn't look like it, so that would be my report.
Deb, team, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate your time and effort. Again, thanks to all the teams, and really appreciate the work that you folks are doing. So at this time, I'm going to hand it on over to Tashelle, and Tashelle can go on.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you so much to all the committees for the comprehensive reports and keeping us abreast of your progress. So now we'll move into a discussion with Dr. Lear Washburn Moses, a professor at Miami University, who will talk to us about master's degree students serving as school-based mentors to foster youth.
Hello, everybody. If you didn't see my post at the beginning, our furnace went out, and so that's why the winter gear. Somebody is working on it right now, so that's why I'm presenting with the mask. Boy, I sure want to thank the Dean's Compact for the opportunity to get feedback from you just for a couple of minutes. And as always, when you start a project, it changes, right? First thing, it changes. So let me talk to you about what I'm working on, and then I really really appreciate you taking a moment to respond to the survey I have, which I'll put in the chat in a second. So most of you probably don't know that I'm a foster parent, and it's a very different world from what a lot of us are used to in academia, even those of us who have more knowledge of children who are in foster care. It's different doing it yourself. And because I have a love of education, I have found that the education of foster youth, you know, we already know this, but I can see it, often gets neglected. And so a lot of you are probably familiar with the CASA, the court-appointed special advocate, who speaks for the foster children and represents their interest in court. So I started thinking about what an educational CASA might look like. And so I know I originally was thinking of master's students, but I'm thinking of a little bit of a different role now. And so as I've written right here, I'm thinking about having foster parents sign up to receive an assistant, because foster parents are so harried and have so much on their plates that the education is not right up front. And so our undergraduate students would be matched with a foster parent who's willing to commit to having an assistant virtually, not necessarily because of COVID, a certain number of hours a week. And I plan to roll this out in a class that I'm teaching in the fall. And then I'm hoping next spring, 2022, that's kind of scary to even say, hoping next spring to make this a larger effort to support foster parents and foster youth around the state. So obviously it's a great fit with this hot topic about trauma-informed teaching. It helps our students learn about collaboration, working with families, challenges that families and foster youth face. So again, the plan is to, with our majors, in this case, I'm starting with special education majors, doesn't have to be, to have foster parents sign up to get this free tutoring for however many children they have in the house. A lot of foster families are quite large. And they would commit to a certain number of hours a week, and our students would work as virtual tutors and get to know the children and the families. So what I am asking you to do, because I do not want to take up more of your time in this wonderful day, is I am putting in a chat a link to a very quick anonymous survey. And I really hope that, I really appreciate you giving me feedback on this model, because it's just in the first stages. And that's it. I just really appreciate the Dean's Compact giving me a few minutes to get feedback on my work.
Thank you so much, Leah. Certainly seems like an interesting line of inquiry that not only has potential professional impact, but some personal stake in it as well. My experience working with youth who have aged out of foster care in secondary settings absolutely indicates that they have endured a certain level of trauma, but they are resilient, wonderful people, and wraparound supports are certainly necessary. So the sooner we can put those things in place for them, I believe, absolutely better. So thank you so much for sharing your passion and your personal story about the work. And I encourage others to go on and complete the survey and help Dr. Leah out with moving this research forward. And now we have Dr. Bell, who is here to continue the discussion on committing to culturally responsive and anti-racist leadership practices to improve equitable outcomes for all students. I would be remiss if I did not say that we were absolutely captivated by you, Dr. Bell, last night. Such a caring, compassionate person, command over the content and the technology. I learned so much just from the technology, in addition to the command that you have over the content. commitment to equity and being intentional about being anti-racist. We all received a comprehensive education on CRT and equity last night, and I am so excited to continue that conversation today and learn more. So the virtual floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Tashelle. I want to say that I was also just really feeling the Zoom energy and the Zoom vibes with this group. And so I just want to say thank you guys for bringing your full selves. And I'm excited to come back today. I love having just an extra day to wrap up in a nice way that's not just like, okay, bye, gotta go. And so today is going to be a day of reflection, and it's also going to give us an opportunity to share a little bit more about our own lived experiences as a way to ground ourselves in critical race theory. And then thinking of how we can do the practical work when we leave, this meeting, some things that we can do on the ground. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay, and And so this is day 2. So day 2 will be a day of reflection. And I really want us to think about some of the ideas that we discussed yesterday. So I want to start with this icebreaker. And this is a collective reflection. One of the ideas that I really wanted to drive home yesterday was remembering our collective humanity. And sometimes when we're living in a society, in a world that is racialized and that is heavily segregated, it becomes really difficult to remember our collective humanity. And so I want us to reflect together on yesterday. What would you say was your biggest takeaway from day 1? And describe your reaction to the anti-racist equity lens and the anti-racist checklist that I provided. And if you need that again, let me know. And you can just write your responses in the chat. Let's take about, I would say 3 minutes. So I'll set my timer for 3 minutes to do that.
Stanley, there was a request in the chat to put up the checklist. Can we do that? Thank you.
I realize now I was muted. I was trying to say I was putting it in the chat.
So take about another minute, and I love some of the responses that I'm seeing. And I just want to start to share some of what I'm reading so that I can be sure to get to everyone. I see between the world and me, yes, and we're going to unpack some more of that. The conversation surrounding equity and equality was helpful. I thought about it more throughout the evening. That's great. I love the comment from Krista that says, I was wondering what each of the things in the list would look like if done correctly. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. And we'll get to that. You're going to create something for yourselves to really think about the practical side of the work. Tanya says, I really appreciated the checklist. It prompted a reflective opportunity for me, and I can see how valuable it will be for our teacher candidates. Yes, Tanya, actually, I did a lot of this work with developing teachers, and they were really just surprised at how much they didn't know. And I think the beautiful thing about the new generation that's coming out, you know, they're growing up in a very digital world. There's a lot of things they know how to do that they've taught me from a digital standpoint. There's our timer. And so yes, it's great for teacher candidates. Take action, do, intentions lack substance, absolutely. Interest convergence from Judith. I studied that term many years ago, but had forgotten about it. Thank you for saying that, Judith. A lot of people forget about the importance of interest convergence and the critique of liberalism, our common humanity. Daria says, I have a much clearer understanding of the definition and elements of CRT, anti-racist checklist. I think the questions are clear and specific and will make people uncomfortable, and that is okay. Through discomfort, we get growth. Love it. Deb says, the Caterpillar video emphasized the need to deal with others by understanding their own perceptions and circumstances. I love it. I love this. Radical love. Yes, radical love. Yes, it's really all about the love for me. And it's unfortunate that love often gets lost in these conversations. But we know that love is a really critical piece of this. I want to know, does anybody want to share? And you can just write in the chat box. First of all, these responses are great, and I've been collecting them, taking images and snapshots with my phone. Does anybody want to share? And if you do, you can just turn your mic off and just share with us if you want to share what you wrote publicly. Jane says, to work harder at learning more about this and to implement it more actively with my students. Yes, implementation is key. Okay, so if nobody wants to share, I'm going to move forward, but you know that you can always, you know, just pop in and let me know if you want to share. So I want us to really do a personal self-assessment here. You know, when we do this heavy work around equity, it's really important that we check in with our emotions. And a lot of my work is grounded in social emotional learning because our emotions are everything. It's a superpower. And I like to remind leaders of this. So where are you currently as an anti-racist leader? And this was actually adapted from Watson P. You can see the citation down there, but it's typically used for emergency responders. Okay, and why would I use something like this? It's because we're currently living through a pandemic, and that shouldn't be lost on us. In fact, I think that the fact that we're all living together through a pandemic in simultaneous ways and in different ways, depending on where we live and the resources we have, we must always assess how are we doing when it comes to equity when we're in the middle of a pandemic simultaneously. And so there's thriving, right? If you're thriving, you're in the I got this as an anti-racist leader, and you can read what it says below. If you're surviving, something isn't right. You feel like, you know I should be doing this work, but something isn't right. If you're struggling, then you think that you can't keep this up. Like it feels like too much. It feels overwhelming. And I know that sometimes when it comes to issues of equity and the layers, it's really hard work. There's no way around the difficulty and the complexity of it, but there's also a lot of good in it too. And the last piece is in crisis. If you feel like you can't survive this work, you feel like it's too much. And again, this isn't a judgment. This is just for me to get a pulse of how you're feeling. So in the chat box, you can just put one of the words where you think you currently are. And this is a way for you to self-assess. Let's take a look at that. Let's see. I'm gonna stop sharing for a second. Okay, so I'll give folks some more time. Now I can't find the screen. How are folks feeling? And does anybody want to share? So I would say for myself, I am in the middle of surviving and thriving. There are many days when I feel like something isn't right, I can't do this anymore, or I receive pushback that I find to be unhelpful when it comes to developing teachers and working with school districts. And then some days I feel like I'm thriving. I feel like I see folks really pushing through the work and doing better. So I'm going to take a look at the chat. Okay, between surviving and struggling, that's what Jane says. Stanley says, I'm somewhere between surviving and thriving. All right, between thriving and surviving, I feel that. Sue says, on the brink of thriving. I love it. Liza says, same. Some days I feel more like surviving and other feel like I'm thriving. And I appreciate that, Liza, because if we think of this as a journey, I think some people, want to do all the things in one day. And the reality is that it's a journey. And if you think of it as a lifestyle, which is what I shared yesterday, then you would know that this is ongoing. Surviving. Harrison says surviving. Escalati says surviving. Charles says same here with a lean toward thriving. I love that. I love all the thriving I'm seeing. That's a really good space to be in, surviving and struggling. And so what I want to help us unpack today is, what do we do when we're feeling like we're only thriving or we're struggling? How do we sort of deal with that? And so I want to take a look at today's anti-racist equity lens. And I use Between the World and Me as a bookend to root this work in so that you can continuously think about the text Between the World and Me. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. I go back to this often. And I want to remind you of the purpose of the anti-racist equity lens. The anti-racist equity lens is meant to keep our perspectives grounded in equity in our various roles within education. Everything we do is connected to equity, how we communicate with others, who we choose to spend our time with, who we choose to learn from. And so if everything we do is grounded in an equity lens, we would be a little bit more conscious of our biases, our implicit and explicit biases. So as you read the anti-racist equity lens, I want to read it aloud for you so that you can hear it. The streets were not my problem. If the streets shackled, and that it should say shackled, my right leg, the schools shackled my left. Failed to comprehend the streets, and you gave up your body now. But failed to comprehend the schools, and you gave up your body later. And this is from page 24. And I want to take a look. Yes, you're very welcome. I'm a big fan of read alouds, former English teacher here. So as you think of that, right? The streets shackling his right leg. Yesterday, we talked about the lens where it said, our world is physical, right? Use the body. And so Coates is really reminding us to think about how the embodiment of who we are impacts how we see and understand the world. When we enter into a space, no matter who we are or how we see ourselves, other people are going to see us in a particular way. And it's important to understand what that may be and why. So I want us to look at this trailer, the Between the World and Me trailer. So right now, Between the World and Me, there's a full film based on the book, which is on HBO. I recommend you watching it, but essentially it's a very long read aloud of the book. And different actors in different spaces are sort of reading these excerpts from the book. And it's beautiful because the film was shot in August. And as we know, it's COVID time. And so everyone sort of shot it in a different location. But the way that it comes together is powerful. So because we've been using the text to talk about anti-racism and equity, I want us to take a look at this trailer.
Black is beautiful. The Black body is beautiful. We must never submit our original self. Dear son. Son. Dear son. Daughter. Dear brothers. I'm telling you this in your 15th year. There's no uplifting way to say this. One must be without error here. Everyone has a story. Here's mine. To be Black in the Baltimore of my youth was to be naked before the elements. I wanted to pursue things. I was admitted to Howard University, but formed and shaped by the Mecca. The Mecca is a machine crafted to capture and concentrate the dark energies of all African peoples and inject them directly into the student body. In America, it is traditional to destroy the Black body. I'm sorry that I cannot save you. I've always wanted you to attack every day of your brief, bright life in struggle.
Struggle for your grandmother and grandfather. Struggle for the memory of your ancestors. Struggle for your name. We have made something down here. They made us into a race. We made ourselves into a people.
Yo, America the ugly. This country is deep, to say the least. As from Louisville, Kentucky to LA to the east, where the race been on. But recently I've been making peace with the fact Black bodies are worth more if they're deceased.
So as you think about that trailer, first of all, just some reactions to the trailer. What are some reactions you have to the trailer? And the trailer is a representation of the book that we have been talking about for our anti-racist equity lens. What are some of your thoughts? And as you reflect on that, on what your thoughts are, here's what we're going to do today. So we're going to take the next 15 minutes, all of us, and I'm going to share this with you as well. For the next 15 minutes, you are going to write your own critical race theory counter story, okay? And just a reminder, critical race counter stories are similar to what we did yesterday when we talked about how does your family prepare rice? Thinking about your lived experiences and your ways of knowing and being. Here's what I want you to do. You're going to reflect upon the moment when you recognized race or racism in your life. So I want you to really dig deep, and I want you to go back to the moment when you recognized race or racism in your life. I want you to think about how this memory impacts how you currently see and understand the world, and how does this impact your professional life? And so when we do this, for the next 15 minutes, I want you guys to be as honest as you can, or as honest as you feel comfortable with. And I also want you to know that I'm going to share a counter story with you guys as well, in the spirit of our collective humanity with one another, and also in the spirit of vulnerability and radical love. If we really want to heal the world and transform race and racism, we have to be willing to go there and be vulnerable with one another. So during the 15 minutes, I will have a little background music going on, and you can turn off your cameras while you're writing, but here is what we're doing. And I will stop sharing for a second. And okay, so everybody knows what they're doing, right? So you're taking the next 15 minutes and you're writing about the first time in your life that you recognized race or racism. And you're thinking about how does this connect to your personal and your professional life. Okay, I'm going to play some music.
Because your passion
That really hurt me to turn that off. But I'm glad that so many of you appreciated the music. It's one of my faves, and it just, that ending part, it just always like touches my soul every time. So I want us to come back together, and I want to offer an opportunity for folks to share. So I want to share how this is going to work. I am going to share my counter story with you. And I'm going to just preface this by saying the first time I recognized race and racism, I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. And when I was about 15, I knew what race was at that time, but I didn't understand racism until Abner Louima, who was a Haitian immigrant who lived in my community, was brutalized by police. And it was like a few blocks away from my house. And I remember being 15 years old, and like my family, we were devastated. We were talking about it. We couldn't believe it happened in our community. And then I go to school the next day, and it's like silence. Nobody's talking about it. No one's acknowledging it. And it was almost like two different worlds. It was just so shocking to me. But I didn't yet have the language at 15 that I do now. But I remember how I felt, and I felt so unseen. And I had some of the greatest teachers in high school. And so I just want to keep that in mind, that they were well-intentioned. So I'm going to share my screen with you again. And I'm going to go back. And I'm going to read my counter story. So my counter story is a poem, and I'm going to share it with you. Poetic justice. Social justice called me this morning. She was mourning the school to prison pipeline and the need for students to be defined by small, medium, large scores that do more harm than good. But you should be aware that Scholastic has declared a war on curricula in the so-called free world, where free education and capitalist frustration aimed at teachers' dedication keeps the orchestration of Black and brown bodies at bay. Let's stay just a little bit longer in students' hearts and let them create interdisciplinary art that challenges the status quo, which you know, standardized testing. So I'm going to stop there. And I want this to kind of operate like an open mic where folks jump in and share their counter stories. And so I want some people to share. If you feel comfortable sharing, I would love to hear some of your counter stories, whatever you created. There's our timer.
I would be okay to share. Do we just share, or how does that work?
Yeah, just share with us. You can share context for, you know, how you created your counter story, or you can just start reading what you wrote, however you want to do it.
Okay, thanks. This is Christine Coyle from Ocala. I don't have a beautiful poem like what you did. But the first time I think I recognized race or racism was traveling south with my biracial children about 25 years ago. We had to stop and get gas. And I don't know why I knew to do this, but it had such an impact. I told my kids to hide down in below the car while I went to pay for gas. This was back in the day when you had to walk in and pay. I just had that feeling that we needed to be safe. And I did not feel that if someone saw biracial children in the back of my car, that we would be safe. And there were no words spoken about it. They just did it. And we all knew we had to do it. And that was like my first, oh, that's what is happening here, I think, but we never talked about it. So the counter story now is I have had that conversation with my daughter, and she remembers the moment, but also didn't understand. Like, why didn't we talk about that? It was just a thing we knew to do. And now what we do, we use one another's color for each other. So we use our color to get things done. So when we're in a protest, I'll protect her brown body from a white police officer. And when she needs to go get something done in a conversation where a brown body might not be welcome, I'll get her a space at the table. And when I need to understand, what does that mean? I can't understand from a brown body perspective. I'm a white woman. I can't understand that as a thing I've experienced. She takes the time to help educate me. And so we work together to get things done. That's the counter story, I guess.
And what a counter story you told. You have me crying over here, Christine. I mean, man, thank you. Just thank you for going there, right? And just the complexities of being, right, a mom of biracial children and understanding the privilege and leveraging with them in public spaces. Man, who wants to go after that? Just jump right in. Just let's keep the open mic going.
I'll give it a try.
All right,
It's a
come
tough
on,
one to
Sue.
follow.
you,
But
Christine.
I was born in 1951, so I saw a lot in living in Cleveland. But I'll just read you what I have. It wasn't a moment of revelation, but a compilation of experiences growing up in an urban church setting that was very diverse, but attending an all-white school. I didn't see racism personally with the people I knew, but I knew about it because it was the 50s and 60s and the civil rights movement was everywhere. I had friends who couldn't come to my house in a white suburb of Cleveland, and I couldn't go to theirs in Cleveland itself. I was the same age as several of the girls who were killed in the church bombing in Birmingham, and it struck me that because of my birth, they suffered, and I didn't. I was embarrassed and ashamed to be white, and I still struggle with this feeling. I've taught in classrooms in which I was the only white person, and it was a challenge to gain my students' trust. One memorable moment was when we were having a discussion in my class about racism, and I started to say, well, as the only white person here, and one of my girls turned to me and said, oh my God, I forgot. That was the best compliment because she saw me for what was inside me and not my skin. I've not shied away from honest conversations with my students in middle school or in college, and it's taken some putting myself out there to do this. I think that when we listen to each other and allow each other to open up, we can get beyond our assumptions and dig deeper into what makes us human.
Oh, that was beautiful, Sue. And I love that you talk about being vulnerable with your students as an entry point. And this is what I talk about, right? This is really heart work. When people say it's hard, it's work of the heart, starting with who they are, right? And that student saying, I forgot, right? Because that student had obviously gotten to a place, to me, that is a reflection of also deep trust that you cultivated. And so that's part of the work too, right? We can't talk about equity and anti-racism if there is no trust.
Right.
And so that's really powerful. And Sue, were you also the person who shared that story about the struggle you're having with a colleague? Yes, I thought it was you and I wanted to be sure. And I think similarly, right? And I'm so glad you brought this up. Sorry, let me just, my wacky computer sometimes. I'm so happy that let me stop sharing for a second and bring my screen back up. Okay. I'm so happy that you took it there because interracial tensions on the job are evident, especially in teaching, and nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about it. We just sort of operate, the same thing happens in other companies and organizations, right? Because these are microcosms of the world. And I remember when I was a high school English teacher, all of my crew, like all the Black teachers would be together and the white teachers would be doing their own thing. And then the students who were Latinx would be with either the Black teachers or the white teachers, like they felt like they had to choose. That's what was happening. And I remember one day in the hallway, a student told me, she's like, hey, Miss Bell, but how come the white teachers and the Black teachers don't hang out? And this was a student. And I was like, what? Like, I couldn't believe she was calling me out. And I had to take a moment because I hadn't it's not that I didn't know that we were the white folks that I was working with. I didn't trust all of them. And so our principal, though, who was a white man, he had us do trainings together and like go play softball together. Yes, he did. And like go do other things outside of the school building. And what that did was it cultivated a new level of professional trust. And I'm not gonna lie and say, you know, I was just calling them like, you're my bestie, but at the professional level, we were able to do such great work because I was able to say, okay, today so-and-so has an attitude, I don't really like her, but how can we do this work for our students? And I was really pushed out of my own comfort zone in order to do that. And part of that was just talking to folks. So thank you, Sue, for sharing those two stories, one in the chat box and that as well. I want to hear another counter story. Let's hear another.
May I read?
Yes, that's David, I see you.
Yes. My first heroes were the African-American athletes that my father taught and coached at Aliquippa High School. I'm not sure why I gravitated to the Black players, but I think it was because they were friendlier. My home community is pretty rural. Every Black family, about 10, all lived on a tract of land on Monaca Road. Jerry Dempsey and Lionel Lloyd and I became friends in second grade. We played all kinds of sports together. While use of racial slurs was common in my youth for nearly every subgroup, I didn't experience anyone using race or religion as an issue until 11th grade. I was young for my age and didn't drive until the spring of that year. When Donna R. invited us to her home for a Christmas party, it seemed like a good idea. However, didn't drive, but Jerry Dempsey did. Thus, Jerry, Lionel, and I went to Donna's home. We weren't there very long when Donna asked if she could speak to me privately. We went into the laundry area of their finished basement. She got very close and in a quiet but angry voice said, "My mother's furious. How dare you bring," she used the N-word, "into our home?" "But it's Jerry and Lionel," I replied. "It doesn't matter," she said. "Hanging out of school is one thing. Bringing them to my home is another. Get them out of here." I don't remember the exit. I only recall Donna coming to our lunch table soon afterwards and joking with the three of us. I also recall Jerry saying that Donna was pretty cool. It would be a while before I would tell him what had happened at her party. My dad and mother were both teachers and fought for underdogs. When my dad was near the end, he asked me to write his eulogy. He specifically wanted me to recognize 3 of his former students, all of whom were African American.
Man, my Ohio crew, you guys are taking me there today, man. Come on, David. That was such a powerful counter story, right? Because you're sharing, first of all, the complexity of your parents, what happened in that moment. And by the way, I just love those little details that you added about, I could see the basement and I could see, you know, the one patch of, right? Like, I mean, just those descriptive prose that just really moved me. But then when you talk about your dad and the 3 students, right? But that's what he wanted, right? To be remembered, right? And it just lets you know that it's so easy to judge someone by one thing that they do, right? And so you can't judge your parents for that one moment when you see all these other things that they did, right? But I think the complexity of when you talk about hearing racial slurs, right? Like that becomes the norm in many communities, right? And even in Black communities, right? And it just becomes this dialectic that is acceptable. And so what does it look like to push against that in your family, right? What does it look like to challenge your parents, right? Like I've challenged my mom on some really homophobic things that she used to say. And so it takes a vulnerability. Thank you for sharing that. I think you need to write more of that, David. I think there's a memoir in you, but I just want to put that out there, a whole story about that. Can I hear one more? One more. Last one, because of time, but I really would love to hear one more.
I have one, but it's a little bit different. So
when
I was in the 3rd grade, my family moved from Lexington, Kentucky to Louisville, Kentucky. And so we lived in a suburb outside of Louisville, and I went to a school there. So in the 3rd grade, I was new, and evidently this little girl, African-American girl, whose name was Eleanor, she was new too. So I was fascinated with her, and this Please remember I was a child. I was fascinated with her because her skin was such a beautiful color. And she had pierced ears, which none of us had, but she didn't have any earrings. So she wore broom straws in her ears. And I thought that that was just awesome. So we became fast friends because we didn't have any other friends because we were both new. And so she asked me one day if I could come over and play at her house. So I said, well, I'll have to check with my mom. She said, okay. I said, I'll call you. And she said, well, we don't have a phone. And I said, okay. So I went home and I asked my mom if I could go and play. And so my mom said, well, I'll talk to her mom and we'll get something worked out. So I was so excited. When I went back to school the next day, Eleanor told me that I couldn't come to her house because her mother and her grandmother said that no white people were allowed in their house. And I was really disappointed. I'm third grade. I was really disappointed. And it didn't even really hit me about the white part because I was excited because she was going to plait my hair because I had long hair. She was going to plait my hair and I was bringing the ribbons to do both of our hair because I had some extra ribbon. So I was so disappointed about it. So I just I brought the ribbons back to school to her the next day. And I said, well, you can have these ribbons and just do your hair and show me what it looks like. She said, okay. She came back to school, maybe the next day, the Monday, I don't remember. And she had the ribbons in her hand. And she said, my mother said, I don't take gifts from white people. And at the time I'm thinking, what? I don't get this. So we continued to be friends and we just played at school. And then after Christmas break, she didn't come back. I guess they must have moved. So I ended up telling my mother what had happened. And because I was so upset that I didn't get to see her anymore. And of course, no phone. I had no idea where she really lived in the area. And my mother said, and I'll never forget it, she pulled me in the kitchen and she said, look at me and listen to everything I'm saying. And I said, okay. And she said, you are not to mention any of this to your grandfather or your uncles. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? And I said, yes. But what? She said, no whys, nothing. You are never to mention this again. So, and then of course now she's passed away. And so many times I thought about saying, what did you mean? What was going to happen? Now I know probably what was going to happen. But, at the time as a child, but it was coming from both sides, not just one side. So I often wonder whatever happened to her, and I wonder if she ever thinks of me, but, I had no way of knowing.
Wow, wow. And let me make sure I'm pronouncing your name right. Is it Kanitha?
Yes.
Kanitha, thank you for sharing that counter story. What I realize is we remember things that happened in our childhood that shaped how we see and understand race. And so I want to bring this back to something we discussed yesterday. And I think in Kanitha's story, we hear this. It's okay to be fascinated by difference, right? I think sometimes we feel embarrassed if we're like, oh, like this person's skin is different, or this person's hair is different, or this person's cultural ways of knowing and being or language is different. I think, we can't stop there, right? But we get into the deeper part of it, but we cannot do that as children if our parents don't show us. And so this is why I say this work starts pre-K through 20. It really does. And we also have to help parents, right? So schooling systems helping parents. Maybe it's, changing the parameters of a PTA meeting to let's talk about differences, right? We don't spend time on this stuff. And each of you who shared today, you all remembered something in your childhood. And I saw deep connections to parenting. And so this is some other work that I do, but I talk about critical race parenting because that is what I practice. And my kids and I talk about difference. I remember the first time my daughter saw a sign language interpreter on television and she was confused. And I was like, oh, this is a teachable moment. Time out, stop there, right? Yeah. I could not let her sit there thinking that it was okay to be like, what are they doing, right? And she was only 5 when she was doing this, but these are all the ways that we disrupt these patterns of thinking, especially for children. So with the interest of time, I'm going to move forward, but I want to say thank you for being vulnerable enough to, number one, create these counter stories and to share it. And I want you to know that our counter story is our testimony. We are walking counter stories. We all have these powerful lived experiences that are buried deep inside of us. And what would it look like if we shared some things like this in the classroom, in meetings, right? In casual conversation? How much can we change the world if we were to see it that way? And so we just did that, right? And so I want to remind us, okay, that your stories are important, okay? No matter who you are and where you live or where you're from, you've got a story that nobody else has heard, and that story is important. I want you to think about the things you may have learned about yourself. I want you to think about how it was to hear other people's stories and how that allowed us to see one another's shared humanity. Imagine leading with counter stories as a tool to shift the narrative of whose voices are privileged. And that goes back to this idea of decolonizing curriculum. If we really decolonize curriculum, students will be telling stories all the time. In fact, my students, I would have them write these critical race counter stories. So a pedagogical tip here, I would have students create these critical race counter stories. And you can do this at the undergrad and graduate level as well. And then I would turn it into a huge book, which we use as curriculum, okay? And the students loved it. They would say, oh, let me see Sue's story. Oh, let me see what Stanley wrote. I mean, and they loved it. And this was something that they created. And so I want you guys to keep that in mind as you do this work. Your story is powerful, and how you leverage hearing other people's stories is part of the equity work. So some takeaways. Counter storytelling allows Black and Indigenous people of color to center their experiences as a way to shift deficit narratives regarding who they are and what they can achieve. Code Says Between the World and Me is a powerful example of a mainstream critical race counter story, centering the lived experiences of a Black man in America. And speaking of books, another book I recommend after hearing your counter stories is the book called The Vanishing Half. It is about twins who are white presenting, but they are Black. They are white presenting. One twin chooses to go over to the white side, and the other twin lives a life on the Black side. And I highly recommend this book. It's a great read. It's fiction, but it's also so real. And it also is reflective of a lot of the stories that I heard today regarding how parents try to navigate race or how they try to avoid that conversation entirely. So anti-racist equity lenses must be incorporated into our daily practices as leaders in order to constantly check our own biases while providing equitable outcomes for all students. Guys, right? I mess up all the time too, right? But being committed every day means I'm always checking myself. You know, hey, did you think about this lens? Did you think about that lens? Did you think about people with disabilities? Did you think about LGBTQ plus communities? Did you think about Native American communities who are often left out of the conversation? Did you think about Asian communities who are often left out of the conversation? So I'm always challenging my own biases on a day-to-day basis, and doing that keeps you aligned. We all have biases, guys. And I appreciate the level of vulnerability today, because our biases shape our worldview, but it doesn't have to stop there. We can unlearn the biases that we have. And once we are able to unlearn these biases, we'll be able to understand the degrees of power that we have in this world. Equity work is daily work, and it must incorporate intentional acts of unlearning oppressive behaviors, right? So guys, learning is hard, but unlearning is even harder, especially the older we get, because we know that the older we get, oftentimes we're less willing to make changes. But I think the beauty here is I see people in this room, right, who lived through the civil rights movement and who are willing to really push. And I think that's really powerful in itself. So for Q&A, please use the Slido code 9618 for any final questions. I think we have 5 minutes. You can also type it in the chat box if that is faster for you. I do like having the Slido available because I do go back to the questions. You can always email me, I mean this, selflovelife101@gmail.com or cbell@eleducation.org. I mean that, especially if you're interested in more partnership work. Those of you who reached out about life coaching, I will get back to you today. So shout out to you guys. Life coaching is my other passion. Please follow me, Self Love Life 101 on all platforms. And let's keep doing this important work. Let's keep leading with equity and love and anti-racism and in solidarity for real. I'm gonna stop sharing now. Let me know if you need this information for longer, selflovelife101@gmail.com, cbell@eleducation.org, or selflovelife101.
Can you share that again?
Absolutely.
Sorry.
No, I will share it again. I was too fast there. So I'm just opening the chat. Make sure that I get everyone. Thank you guys so much. You guys are awesome.
We're getting a lot of comments, so I kind of want to sit for a moment and see if any more comments or questions come through for Crystal.
And so I see that Jennifer said she would love to explore intersectionality of ableism and race. And before I know that you guys are on a schedule, I have a resource here. This is all the things. So this is Foundations of Critical Race Theory in Education, 2nd edition, and I'll also type it in the chat. This does a really great intersectional job of addressing special education students, for example, ableism, students with disabilities. It's a great text. I highly recommend it. And I will type it in the chat. It's called Foundations of Critical Race Theory, 2nd edition. And it's an anthology. Thank you guys so much. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate just everyone being vulnerable enough to share today. Thank you, Lachelle, for your for your warm introduction and your kind words. It's been really great just getting to know you guys. You know, people are sleeping on Ohio. You guys are ready and you guys are putting in work, and I'll be sure to spread the word. Thank you so much. Email me if you want to follow up with anything. Honestly, I will respond to your email, and I love going there extra after. And have a great day, guys. Have a great weekend.
And I will say, woo, you came with some fire to yesterday and today, and we appreciate it. We love it. You have seen what is absolutely infectious for me about Dean's Compact. That these folks, we are collectively willing to dive in, lean in, and be vulnerable because we're absolutely committed to our students and families and communities that we serve. We are absolutely appreciative of the overview of CRT. I know so many folks needed that, appreciated that, making that connection that CRT is about developing solutions in housing, education, and healthcare, understanding that trifecta for Black and Brown folks, Indigenous folks, and other folks of color in the United States. Encouraging us to be intentional about intersectionality and really embracing the humanness of the work and in people, encouraging us to be understanding, use our CRT and our understanding of racism to leverage equity in our spheres of influence and our respective spheres of influence, and that may be different and it's okay. Certainly giving us that snapshot. So you kind of helped us move from this theoretical frame to this very data informed frame to a very practical frame. And that's really what I'm trying to connect here. The theory, the data, helping us really address, look at those realities that we face in Ohio every day. We believe that we know them, but sometimes when you just see it, it is undeniable. And certainly when you see it together, right? I just felt the heaviness, right? Even virtually, looking at that and what that meant to us, and how will we somehow continue to engage in the work that can bring about a positive change. Being mindful of pre and post-COVID impact on Black and brown bodies, to the whole trifecta that CRT asks us to consider, and then questioning it from a critical stance, this notion of intentions versus actions, moving us again towards a more actionable perspective, letting us know what leading in equity looks like, and being really clear that diversification of the educator workforce is absolutely one of the many things that you listed. And you gave us concrete examples on that. So we're not walking away wondering what that looks like and how we can assess it or see it in ourselves, educating us on pandemic pedagogy versus culturally responsive teaching and learning, and helping us unpack our fears and humanity and love. I promise that's what it's about. Every single day, arriving at seeing the humanness in each person and loving that. And engaging with children and families in our communities that way, and being intentionally anti-racist. And what does it look like? You dropped us, you gave us a checklist, okay? So you certainly didn't want us to waver on that. Here are some things that you can consider for your own edification and edification of educator preparation or educator candidates that you are preparing. And then the counter stories. I mean, and encouraging us that every single story has meaning and value, and so tell it, right? So that not only helps the individual, but the collective. This was powerful, no matter where we are on the continuum, absolutely powerful. I don't care if you're striving or struggling, we learned today, and it was so heartfelt, and we absolutely appreciate everything, all the love, all the honesty, all the commitment, all the compassion that you brought to us. Thank you so much, Crystal.
Thank you. Thank you, Tashelle. I'm ready to come to your church, by the way. I'm just letting you know. That's all I can say is amen. Thank you for just saying that so beautifully. And the feeling is so mutual. You guys are talented. And I just feel humbled that I had an opportunity to be in this space. Shout out to you guys. I'm humbled and I'm overwhelmed with the love. And so thank you guys so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Okay. With that, if no one else has any comments, questions, or concerns, we'll move right into next steps. That would certainly be my wrap up that I just shared, what I hope were our collective takeaways. I did want to send out another reminder. I believe 7 folks or so have completed Dr. Leah's survey. Stanley, if you could put the link to that survey in the chat room again, so that folks, in the chat, so that folks can access it. I certainly think that there is meaning in that work, and our voice informing Dr. Leah how she could potentially move forward will make it even more meaningful. So if we could do that for her, I'd really appreciate it. I'd like you to look at the 2021 meeting schedule, Dean's Compact. We have it listed. We've got the January conference coming up. Please register if you have not already, including myself. We've got the March and the June quarterly meetings as well. And then finally, You should be receiving the evaluation for this quarterly meeting if you have not already. Amy has put it in the chat. Please take a few moments to complete that evaluation. It absolutely helps us with future planning, not only for the quarterly meetings, but also the conference. And with that, are there any other questions or comments? It's good for the order. All right. Well, I'm always honored to be able to facilitate these meetings. I'm absolutely enjoying this co-facilitation with Mark. We're taking a different stance, and I think it's adding a whole lot of value and meaning to it, and kind of bringing greater visibility to the vice chair role as well. And I'm so thrilled that you are agreeable and doing something a little bit different with me, Mark. Thank you so much. And so, with that, I'll see you all next time. Happy holidays, however you spend it. Take care of yourselves, be safe, and be warm. Much love, y'all. Take care.